The first North Americans. Many believe they came from the west. But could the first people have traveled an ice bridge across the Atlantic Ocean?
This is a very different concept of where people may have come from.
These people were here, and they were here in great numbers.
It's a controversial idea that many do not accept.
99.5% of all archaeologists do not accept that people crossed the North Atlantic.
It's a romantic story, but it doesn't hold up to the evidence.
This is it, I'll tell you.
But there are intriguing finds. And the First Nations people search for answers.
We are curious to know the life and times of our ancestors.
We're changing the history of the world.
Is there enough evidence to rewrite the story of the peopling of the Americas? They are people whose story is lost in time. The first humans to arrive in North America left little evidence of their journey. But scientists have mostly agreed on where they came from and when. Now, two archaeologists believe they may have evidence that dramatically challenges the accepted theory. "20,000 years ago, North America is in the grip of an ice age. Beasts like the short-faced bear, the American cave lion, and the giant sloth dominate the landscape. Humans won't set foot here for another 6,000 years, or so we thought. New discoveries could suggest that a group of highly sophisticated Ice Age people came here 20,000 years ago by crossing the Atlantic Ocean. In 2012, a team of archaeologists made a startling discovery on a tiny island just off the east coast of Maryland. They discovered a series of ancient tools sticking out of a 20,000-year-old layer of silt.
Where we are right now, around the Chesapeake Bay area, where we found some pretty extraordinary things that are not expected. In fact, they're changing history.
Dennis Stanford is a world-renowned Ice Age archaeologist. Bruce Bradley is an expert in prehistoric stone tools. Their most significant finds are two thin stone blades called bifaces.
And this is a biface, very thin. It's been resharpened a couple times, and it was in place with about this much of it sticking out of the bank. And here's another biface. We have done some blood residue analysis on this artifact, and as it turns out, it's got buffalo blood on it.
The team believes it's clear evidence of a 20,000-year-old camp in Chesapeake Bay. But this challenges everything known about the first peoples to set foot in the Americas, who they were, how they got here, and when they arrived. The accepted theory is that the first North Americans journeyed by foot from Northeast Asia across the Bering Land Bridge and lived for thousands of years in Beringia, then entered the continent 14 to 16,000 years ago. But the discoveries at Chesapeake Bay could mean that people were here much earlier.
What's changed is we now have things that are 6,000 to 10,000 years older on the eastern side of North America. Now, this doesn't work at all with the old theory. From there comes the obvious question, where did these people come from?
Bradley and Stanford compared the Chesapeake finds with other stone tools from around the world, looking for similar manufacturing techniques. They found a match in an ancient people called the Solutrense.
This is a cast of a Solutrean biface, and this is one from our new site. They match in terms of shape, method of manufacture, size, and use. And that was a conundrum. You know, what the heck is going on here?
How could Solutrean artifacts be in North America? The Solutreans lived in what is now France and Spain during the Ice Age. That's over 6,000 kilometers and an ocean away from the Chesapeake. Stanford and Bradley invite a Solutrean stone tool expert to the dig site for his opinion of the artifacts.
So John, tell me what's happening here.
This knife, this bifacial knife, was found sticking out of the contact between the upper soils and the lower soils. This is dated at 20,000 years ago.
Wow, this is really an incredible context.
And that's well documented.
It's just incredible. My first impression is the thinness of it. I have seen pieces like this in the late Paleolithic of France and Spain, for that matter. It reminds me of the laurel leaves from the Solutrense.
The details of technology are extremely similar.
Yes.
Which is Solutrean.
Solutrense, yeah. It's not just a vague resemblance. There are similarities, technical, that go well beyond. They are almost identical.
That's cool to have somebody who has real Solutrean expertise to see what we think we have, and he's looking at it and thinking, you know, you got something here.
Dr. Bradley travels to the heart of Solutrean territory in France to investigate. Here, he has gained access to archives where thousands of Solutrean artifacts are held.
Okay, this is really good. Yeah.
He's hunting for evidence of Solutrean innovation.
We do have evidence of what people living at that time period were dealing with. And this was what we call the glacial maximum. This is when the Ice Age was pushing glaciers and covering most of Europe with ice, which is very difficult to live in.
The Solutrean people were really quite advanced. They did cave art primarily. They were illustrating animals, but sometimes just handprints. These illustrations carry some important messages relative to what's sacred and what isn't.
If you say the word Solutrean to an archaeologist, this is the tool that often comes to mind, this bi-pointed knife-like tool. What's often extremely respected is to have something this long and wide that's this thin.
Solutrean tools are thinner and sharper than almost any stone tools made before. This is because of a unique technique called overshot flaking. The Solutreans would strike the stone with incredible precision, causing fractures that fan out from the point of impact. They repeated this many times to create an extremely thin tool shaped like a leaf. It's one of their many inventions.
They innovated a lot of different things that we see as technologies that the other people didn't do. So one of the innovations is a needle that has an eye in it. The development of an eye needle makes sewing much more efficient. That's something that becomes very dominant and widespread after that development. They were primarily hunters. We know that they were hunting reindeer, sometimes horses. They developed what we call a spear thrower, which has an incredible advantage in terms of velocity and killing power than from the hand. If you do that with a spear thrower, it's many times more force.
But food is scarce at the peak of the Ice Age.
Solutrense people, as like many other people in the world, wouldn't just sit around and get either conquered or die out from starvation. They're going to, like the rest of us, have that drive to survive. So Dennis Stanford and I came up with this hypothesis that people came across the North Atlantic somehow at the last glacial maximum about 20,000 years ago and ended up in North America on what's now the East Coast and established themselves here. This is a very different concept of where people may have come from.
Bradley and Stanford believe it was the ice itself that could have presented the Solutreans with an opportunity.
During the Ice Age, there was an ice shelf between the two continents. So I think that it's highly possible that the Solutreans could have traveled west across the ice bridge or along the edge of the ice from Europe to North America.
Stanford and Bradley's idea is a radical departure from the accepted theory of the peopling of the Americas. Despite this, they decide to announce their hypothesis to the world.
We had, within our profession of archaeology, we had a pretty strong negative reaction across the board.
Well, we knew what all our colleagues were going to say. You're off your rocker. And they still think so.
The Solutrean hypothesis is not a viable hypothesis for the peopling of the Americas. It should be abandoned.
It's a nice story. It's a romantic story. People like that. It's fun. It's new. It's different. But it doesn't hold up to the evidence.
Currently, the evidence is pointing at that really the first Americans came here around 15 or 16,000 years ago, and that they came from Asia.
Nobody's saying that people didn't come through the Bering Land Bridge. Everybody's good with that. We know they did. It's not a problem. But did they come in additional ways? Hands up. I think so. Other people don't. They're fighting about it.
Most arguments are over the tools. Many critics think any similarity between stone tools in North America and the stone tools in Europe is just a coincidence.
You can have similar looking technologies used on different continents, but they're being made by different people. Let's just think about the pyramids of Egypt and the pyramids of Mexico. They were independently invented on both those continents.
If you look at the details of the pyramids in Egypt versus the pyramids in Mesoamerica, there's many, many details that aren't the same.
Bruce Bradley is a world expert on how to make ancient stone tools using a skill known as flint knapping. And like the pyramids, Bradley believes it's not the shape of the tools that is important, but how they are constructed.
The Solutrean approach to making stone tools, it's distinctive, unique in the world. We want to make it very, very clear that we're looking at incredible detail, how things were made, how things were used. There's a big Atlantic Ocean in between here and southwestern Europe, and that's a conundrum in the sense of, could this happen accidentally? We argue no, absolutely. It couldn't be unrelated.
If Bradley is right, and the tools in the Chesapeake were made by Solutreans, how did they get there?
There are still a lot of questions to be answered about how did these people made it? How would this be possible?
Bruce Bradley is convinced that an Ice Age people from ancient Europe were the first to colonize North America. He travels to the coast of France, searching for clues about their ancient culture. At the base of the Pyrenees Mountains is Isturiz Cave, once inhabited by a group of Solutrean people. Bradley meets the landowner, Joel Darico.
This is just phenomenal. It's overwhelming.
What I'm here to see and find out about is, are there any connections or evidence of connections to the sea, to the ocean here?
Yes. You have several deers. Strange thing is that with the deer, you have a salmon.
Wow, that's incredible. A fish associated with deer. That's really interesting. In many cultures, salmon are very special because they live both in the sea and in the rivers. It might indicate connection with the ocean.
And in Cosquer Cave, on the coast of France, is another Solutrean painting of a now extinct seabird. The great auk was a tall, flightless bird standing 80 centimeters in height. This powerful swimmer may hold the key to how and why the Solutreans headed west.
The great auk was a beautiful bird. I mean, it was a large bird, you know, weighed about 10 pounds. It would have been this big. It had a white spot on the forehead, and it had this beautiful black sheath over its bill. And the great auk has a huge breast muscle. It has a lot of oil in it, the same as a seal would, so it's probably very nutritious food.
Auks were agile swimmers, but clumsy on land, allowing them to be hunted to extinction in the 19th century. But during the Solutrean times, they were plentiful.
There were a lot of them. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. It would be like a bird city. You'd be awestruck.
Some scientists believe the ice edge would have been teeming with fish, seals, whales, and seabirds.
How could you not see this massive grocery store out there on the edge of the ice and not say, okay, it's worth the risk? All you got to do is follow the food. So how could these people, these Solutrean people living on the edge of the ocean, not take advantage of it? I turn the question around all the time. Not why would they, why wouldn't they?
But Stanford and Bradley's critics remain unconvinced.
When you talk about the Solutrean hypothesis, the weight of the evidence isn't there. As much as they want it to be, it's not. Every idea, every hypothesis is open to testing, and it has to withstand the scrutiny of the evidence.
To date, Stanford and Bradley are basing their hypothesis on artifacts found while scouring the beach. To convince the scientific community of a Solutrean presence in North America, they must conduct a proper archaeological excavation.
If Dennis Stanford and Bruce Bradley excavate this archaeological site off the eastern seaboard, and they find evidence of early occupation, 20,000 years old, and it's in a sealed geological context, and it's well dated, and you have definite artifacts there, then we'll have to accept that as an old archaeological site.
Based on the pattern of where they found artifacts on the beach, the team has zeroed in on the best spot to do a controlled date.
The importance of this site is potentially, it's the smoking gun. We think we have people here 20,000 years ago. We've got really good evidence so far. We just need to back that evidence up with a little bit more in-place material.
Their goal is to find artifacts near a fire pit or hearth. The charcoal from the burnt wood can then be radiocarbon dated to verify the age of the tools.
If we get the radiocarbon date and tools in place with the hearths, they're going to have a real hard time denying. And that's going to happen because these people were here and they were here in great numbers.
They are working against the clock. The same erosion that exposed the artifacts is threatening the dig site itself. In 3 years alone, 300 meters of the western shoreline has disappeared into the bay.
This new high tide that's coming in right now is going to dissolve a lot of that soil that could contain artifacts. If there is a 20,000-year-old occupation here, we hope it hasn't been destroyed by coastal erosion.
We've got a serious offshore breeze right now that reversed the tide. It looks like it's coming in even harder right now with bigger waves.
Fun thing about archaeology is you have all these plans and Murphy always takes hold and you never know what's going to happen.
And all we can do is really keep making dams here and hope that the tide starts reversing itself.
If the tide continues to rise, the evidence they need could be washed away. Offshore from Stanford and Bradley's dig site in Maryland, the high tide has subsided, revealing new finds.
Whoa, look at this. This is great. This is a piece of quartz. It's probably a waste product of making a tool of some sort.
Some person made this and used it, lost it, threw it away, whatever. But it's a piece of history.
20,000 years ago, when ice spanned the Atlantic between North America and Europe, it wasn't solid. Ice islands, many several kilometers wide, shifted and cracked with the ebb and flow of North Atlantic currents. Traveling only by foot would be too dangerous. Stanford spent years in the Arctic, and it led to an idea about how the Solutrense could survive the crossing.
I had worked in Alaska with Inuit hunters. I've been out on the ice, and I see these huge ice islands. And I'm thinking now, how, you know, those Solutrense guys, maybe they had boats. If they had a boat, then they'd be in good shape for getting around the ice. And if you have a boat, you know how to deal with rough water. My theory is that they were out there expanding their territory and hunting seals and stuff. The great auk would be out there, just all kinds of resources. So I think that's an entirely plausible story.
Stanford believes the Solutrense could have walked on the ice islands and paddled boats between them. But archaeologists are skeptical of any theory that can't be backed by concrete proof.
There's no evidence that Solutrean people had boats. We don't have a boat. We don't have any tools to show the boats were made. And so we don't have any solid evidence of boat transport.
The oldest concrete evidence of boats is wooden paddles found in Western Europe, dating back 9,500 years. But new indirect evidence suggests humans may have used boats to travel between Indonesia and Australia as far back as 65,000 years ago.
If you think about boats, most boats are made out of wood, skin, organic materials that do not preserve over time. We don't have the boats, but we have people in Australia. So we know unless you want to put them in hot air balloons to get there, then watercraft was involved. You know, we think that easily goes back 20,000 years to the Solutrean times.
Jodrey has spent years researching ancient water transport. She believes that boats, once used by the Inuit, are a clue to the type of boats Solutreans could have used.
If you're going to really be moving a whole group like an extended family, multiple extended families, you need a cargo carrier. You need like the SUV of the day to carry the family in. And that would be the umiak, and that's the way they used it. You can fill that up with a lot of equipment, a lot of people. You can pull that up on the ice, turn it on its side, and use it as a weather break.
We landlubbers think of the ocean as a threat, but people that live on the ocean and use the ocean think of it as a highway. We know historically that the ocean was the way people migrate.
If Solutreans did come and settle in North America, could genetic evidence provide a clue? There's an indigenous group in eastern Canada called the Huron-Wendat with questions about their genetic ancestry. They have an intriguing origin story.
We have a legend that is saying that the Huron-Wendat came from the east, from the great salted lake, from a mountain, a cave, from the Atlantic.
Dr. Lesage is a biologist, and he's curious to know if there is scientific evidence to support the legend. He's come to England as the driving force behind a groundbreaking genetic study.
We have questions, and we want answers. We are curious to know the life and times of our ancestors.
Lesage has brought 40 teeth of his ancestors exhumed from burial sites dated to pre-European contact. Genetic work using First Nations remains is rarely sanctioned, but the Huron-Wendat are determined to learn of their origins.
It's quite something to know that it's my ancestors that are in this little box. And please don't call them samples. They are not samples, they are individuals. That's important. It's your responsibility to take care of them.
We're very honored and grateful in the trust that the Huron-Wendat have put in us to do this work. This project will look directly at the ancient and modern DNA of First Nations populations and test the possibility that some of their ancient DNA actually came directly across the Atlantic.
Oppenheimer's team is looking for a small genetic marker called X2A. X is a gene group that appears in people from the western part of the European continent. Its descendant, X2A, shows up in the indigenous people of eastern North America. But there's no trace of X in East Asia, Siberia, or Alaska. Oppenheimer believes that the most direct route for X was across the Atlantic.
Looking at this evidence, it is clear that the most obvious route is across the Atlantic.
Most geneticists don't agree with Dr. Oppenheimer's interpretation of X.
Oppenheimer is arguing from one single genetic marker. We cannot explain the peopling of the Americas based on one piece of data. It has to be supported by multiple lines of evidence, or it's not a good model. And Currently, the best model we have is people came here from Beringia, not from Europe.
The big flaw in these arguments against X are that they are dependent on there being a single entry into America. But how do they know that? Obviously, there could be multiple entries, certainly multiple gene lines in the Americas.
Oppenheimer's team will spend the next 3 months searching for evidence of X2A. If he finds it, it will provide much-needed support for their theory that the earliest migration came from the East. But even if ancient DNA holds a migration clue, many critics argue Solutrean ingenuity would have been no match for Ice Age conditions. During the Ice Age, frigid winds blew from west to east over the top of a 4-kilometer thick ice sheet that covered Canada. By the time the winds reached the North Atlantic, the average temperature was minus 35 degrees Celsius.
You'd have to be traveling across the entire North Atlantic. That seems highly unrealistic. It would have been a very difficult task, you know, for anyone with any kind of watercraft.
But during the Ice Age, the Atlantic Ocean wasn't as wide as it is today.
People constantly say 4,000 miles. Well, it's not. Look at the ocean and the sea ice at that point in time and what's exposed.
Today, 4,000 miles, or almost 6,000 kilometers of ocean, separate Europe and North America. But during the Ice Age, massive ice sheets locked up so much water that the sea level dropped drastically, exposing the continental shelves on both sides, cutting the distance to only 2,000 kilometers.
That's still a long way, but for Inuit people, that wasn't a big deal to go 1,500 miles across the north of Canada.
People are remarkable. We're so smart. Well, they were that smart too.
Stanford's experience in the Arctic gives him insight into how people survive in a frozen world.
Oil is fat, and we render it out of animals, seals in particular, and the great auk. You just need it for everything, for light, for heat, for protection. Oil was probably the most important thing in their lives to get. And the best places to get the oil was on the ocean, on the ice. That's where the major sources are. You can live out there all year round.
Stanford believes the Solutreans never intended to cross the Atlantic. They were lured by the never-ending bounty of the sea.
The journey may have been totally accidental. Pretty soon, you just keep moving, and you might end up in the continental shelf of North America.
At the dig site, Peggy Jodry spots a tantalizing clue.
Dennis, I think we've got a small piece of charcoal in the occupation level in here.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
The charcoal fragment could be evidence of a fire pit and will allow the team to get an accurate radiocarbon date for the site. But they still have 15 centimeters of soil to remove before they'll know for sure.
I think that this looks like charcoal right here. Do you see that black speck right there? It's very exciting because we're coming down on charcoal, yay. We can get a radiocarbon age for this. And if we're lucky, maybe we'll find stone flakes to go along with that, little stone artifacts. And so that in itself.
Wow.
Are you okay? I think think everybody needs to stay away from the wall. Just the vibration of it, I can see cracking in here.
The cliff face holds on, for now. But will they reach their goal in time? At the dig site in Chesapeake Bay, the eroding cliff forces the team to proceed cautiously toward the 20,000-year-old layer of silt.
Well, we're about that close, and that's really exciting because this is the layer we need to be in. And hopefully we'll find some evidence of cultural occupation in this level that we're coming on down to now.
But the only evidence that could have survived all this time is bone, charcoal from a campfire, and stone tools, technology that is key to the survival of Ice Age people. Stanford and Bradley believe a group of Solutrense endured months of extreme weather conditions crossing the ocean, and eventually became the first humans to arrive in this strange new world.
When you landed here, you'd be in front of an Ice Age environment, which is what you were in front of at home. And you know exactly how to adapt to it.
The first task for the Solutrense would have been to find the proper stones for making tools.
Pretty soon they begin to understand where they are. And it's pretty good because nobody else has been there before and there's lots of stuff. So you'd set about finding the resources you need, you know, and you're going to start off on the beach looking for pebbles.
Once they hit land, they would have encountered new animals, with animals that never seen people before.
This new landscape was home to massive prehistoric mammals that didn't exist in Ice Age Europe, including one of the most lethal predators of the Ice Age, the short-faced bear. It was a 900-kilogram killer, capable of chasing its prey at 40 kilometers an hour and rearing up to heights of almost 4 meters.
It would have been a challenge, but I think that challenge would have been met by slowly adjusting to the new behavior of those animals.
The team's theory is that once the Solutrense adapted to their new home, the ice bridge could allow populations to grow by connecting the old world with the new one.
We're not talking about migration. We're talking about expanding territory to the point where they're tethered on land at both ends and using the middle as the grocery store.
I think some stayed, some went back. They brought their technology with them, and we're finding that technology on the Chesapeake Bay.
But if they were the first into North America, did the Solutrense leave a genetic trace? After months of exhaustive work, Oppenheimer's team has made a surprising discovery. They found the X2A marker in 3 of the ancient Huron-Wendat teeth.
We have found evidence that X2A was present before Columbus.
Yeah.
Very clearly.
That's very interesting.
It's not something which came over with Columbus.
Yep.
We can say for those who have the X2A, it's likely that their ancestors came from across the Atlantic.
The evidence is there. They came from the ocean. They are from the east. This new findings about the X2A genes is very fascinating, the way that we can put it in parallel to the legend of the arrival of the Huron-Wendat. It just blew out our previous conception of the colonization of North America. And these kind of results help us brick by brick to construct our history. Who were we exactly? For me, I'm proud to say that my ancestors helped all of us to better understand our common history.
For Lesage, it's a window into his people's past. But Oppenheimer's work continues to defy the accepted wisdom of his colleagues.
The only way that this story could be possible, I see it as a geneticist, is if people came here but didn't leave any descendants. We do have an analog for that. The Vikings. As far as we can tell, they did not leave any genetic descendants, but they left enough archaeological evidence that there's no question they were there. The fundamental thing that you have to carry with you all the time in science is the possibility that you could be wrong, the possibility that you have to go where the evidence leads.
This is it, I'll tell you.
Alrighty, here we go.
Yay.
We're starting to see charcoal, and it's in relatively large pieces.
Wow, there's a lot of charcoal in here. That's really neat.
It's gratifying that we're finding some things like this. It's really critical information. Without it, we'd be really struggling.
Absolutely, yeah.
The small bits of charcoal are evidence of a nearby fire, but they didn't find a hearth. The charcoal is sent away for carbon dating. But before the dig ends, a final discovery is made.
What do you got?
Complete.
It's lovely because it's made out of the quartzite that we're finding all the flakes from. Look at it. Woo! Isn't that neat? A complete biface for the last day. It's the point of the last day. Neat, isn't it?
Oh, Christ. Look at that little hunter.
Oh, wow.
It's fantastic.
Finding this on the last day is a good omen. It's going to ensure that we're going to want to come back and do more work.
That's amazing.
4 months later, the results of the carbon dating arrive. 3 of the charcoal samples are dated to 22,000 years old, the beginning of the Solutrean era, ensuring that Bruce Bradley and Dennis Stanford will never give up searching for the truth.
What is exciting to me about this whole thing is not that we're going to have a better story. What's exciting about it is it's expanding our understanding of the human experience and enriching it beyond what we could have ever imagined.
A young archaeologist in the future will be taught a different story based on the work that we've been doing, because we're changing the history of the world.
If Stanford and Bradley are right, Solutrean ingenuity took them further than anyone ever imagined.